Hi guys, welcome to HSC Chemistry and another video in the Production of Materials series. We've been looking at ethanol recently, and what we want to do now is to start to look at some of the reasons why ethanol has been included in this particular topic, particularly as it relates to an alternative fuel source. So the problem, since the end of the Second World War, the demand for crude oil has significantly increased. And as a result of that, we are concerned about the non-renewable petroleum running out. At some point, we're going to lose all of the oil that we have, all of the petroleum that we are. We're just going to use it up. So as a consequence of that, we need to start thinking about some alternatives. So what are the alternatives? And it's not just thinking about alternatives in terms of energy production. We also know that some of the products of crude oil also produce certain types of materials, such as some of our polymers. So we need to be thinking about what we're going to do in order to replace some of these very important energy producing compounds and also some of these starter materials, monomers for these polymers. If we run out of crude oil, two difficulties that we have, as I mentioned before, the big problems that we have are fuel and also polymers. So what are we going to do? This is the problem. This is the dilemma that we face. How do we solve this problem? Well, one of the ways of being able to at least address one of these problems is the issue of replacement fuels. Because there are more and more cars on the road all the time, there are more and more vehicles that are used for transport. The population continues to increase. It's very mobile, and as a consequence of that, we continue to use planes and buses and trains and cars and all sorts of different things to move us around. Now, they all require an energy source, a fuel source, and the majority of these are heavily reliant on the materials that come from fossil fuels, from crude oil, natural gas, and also from coal. And so we need to be thinking about what are some alternatives, what are the ways that we can deal with the fact that these are non-renewable resources and they're not going to last forever. So one proposition is that we look at an alternative fuel source such as ethanol. Now, the important thing about ethanol is to think about the reactions involved in the combustion of ethanol, makes comparisons with the combustion that occurs in, say, octane, which is the key component in most petrols that we currently use for our vehicles. So when we use octane, if we look at octane as an example, when it burns, and this is assuming, of course, complete combustion, then we have a ratio of 1 to 12.5 fuel to oxygen. The other thing that we have is a 1 to 8 ratio of fuel to carbon dioxide production. Now, each of these ratios is fairly important and ones that we want to look at as we continue our study of ethanol. When we look at ethanol, similar to the octane, it will completely combust. So our products, again, are carbon dioxide and water. But this time, each mole of ethanol is only using 3 moles of oxygen. Now that's a quarter, less than a quarter of the octane. But also importantly, the ratio is 1 to 2 for the amount of carbon dioxide that is going to be produced in this reaction. So there's actually 4 times as much carbon dioxide produced in the burning of 1 mole of octane. Now, of course, this is a very simple way of looking at this reaction, because all it does is focus on the ratio of oxygen to the fuel itself. And we can see the ratio 1 to 12.5 as opposed to 1 to 3. And so one of the problems, of course, with that is that you need far less oxygen for ethanol for it to completely combust. Because you need more for octane, there is a greater chance that we'll have incomplete combustion, and the problems with incomplete combustion, of course, is carbon monoxide being produced, or even carbon in the form of soot, particulates. These are the products of incomplete combustion and the consequence of there being insufficient oxygen available. So if we're going to try and look at some arguments about whether or not ethanol is useful as a potential replacement, well, this area of complete combustion is just one area where we would give it a big tick. We'd also give it a tick in terms of the carbon dioxide that's being released through the combustion, but there are a lot of other factors that go into the discussions around ethanol as a potential fuel source. To just summarize those briefly, and I will put another video together which will give you some, I guess, a more stepped answer if you're going to be trying to analyze ethanol as a potential fuel source. And that is partly because, very simply, it can be used as a fuel source. At the moment, the biggest problem is that our car engines cannot cope with high concentrations of ethanol. You know, we cope with about 10%, maybe 15% for some, but most of our engines are not designed to cope with ethanol as a fuel source. So that's one small problem. But it does have some potential as an alternative fuel source, partly because of what we looked at in terms of complete combustion, partly because of what we looked at in terms of carbon dioxide, but also because of its potential to be converted into ethylene. And we've looked at those before. And as a consequence of that, we may be able to use it to then source some of our very important materials like our polymers and plastics. Thanks for watching.